is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact on just about every aspect of life around the world, with education being one of the hardest hit sectors. The pandemic has to date caused the disruption of learning to over 1 billion students globally. Most schools have been closed due to the pandemic, meaning students either do not have any classes or have to rely on e-learning. However, with Africa's challenges in terms of connectivity and accessibility, this is not possible across the board. But despite quarantines and lockdowns, education must go on. This week on Talk Africa, we examine the challenge of learning in Africa during this COVID-19 pandemic. We look at what can be implemented now and in future to streamline education and what role technology can play in all of this. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, as the pandemic continues to disrupt learning in Africa, countries have had to adapt. In South Africa, one of the countries hardest hit by COVID-19, some teachers are taking an innovative approach to ensuring students are ready for their high school examinations. Our correspondent Julie Shire brings us more.
Tamanaika lives in an informal settlement in KwaZulu-Natal, one of the poorest provinces in South Africa. She needs to pass her matriculation exam to graduate secondary school. It's anxious times for her and other grade 12 learners who aren't at school during the extended lockdown.
It's very difficult as we are studying alone without any teachers to help us. But our teachers has gone the extra mile to help us through WhatsApp by sending work for term 2. And it has given us opportunities to recap what we didn't really focus on in our term 1 work.
Naika's teacher Sunaina Partab has been hard at work preparing daily lessons.
I download the content, I screenshot it, and I send it to my economics learners. With accounting, it's a bit tough because it's a subject where you need to be in front of the learner and teach them every single transaction.
But most parents here rely on social grants and menial jobs, making the task harder.
Right now, getting basic food essentials is a problem, let alone getting access to technology. So what I have done is I have made an appeal to my family members who have come on board to get them access to at least food hampers, because the learners, if they do not have access to basic things like food, the learners can't concentrate.
Lessons are being made available online and through radio and TV. Last year's matriculants who remember the pressure of their final exam are also helping.
We started off using WhatsApp for students that didn't have online access to something like Zoom or Skype. More recently, we've expanded to use Zoom. We do Zoom conferences with 10 students where we go through a topic. We answer questions that they may have. We go through past papers. We've now moved to YouTube where we record a lesson using our notes from last year and our study notes.
South Africa's matric exams are expected to still go ahead. Grade 12 learners might have to go back to school before restrictions are lifted. The Education Department is also considering scrapping holidays for the rest of the year once schooling resumes, so that not all is lost. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And joining me now to unpack the impact of COVID-19 on education in Africa is Rian Vanderberg. He's joining me from Johannesburg, South Africa via Skype. He's the Education Technology Manager for the Federation of Governing Bodies of South African Schools. Rian, welcome to the program and thank you for joining us. I want to start by looking at the global figure of about 1.5 billion learners. That represents about 91% of the total enrolled learners that have been affected by school closures as a result of COVID-19. Give us an inside look at the options that some African governments are exploring to ensure that education opportunities continue at this time.
Yes, I think in South Africa it's 100%, not 91% of learners that's been impacted. We have full school closure and full lockdown. And yes, it's a troubling time. I don't think schools were prepared for this big disruption or interruption in schooling, and we're struggling to find the perfect solution. Number one, in remote and continued learning, and number two, in finding the right methodology and go back to school. The return to school is a big struggle at this point in time. Schools are trying to make, individual schools are trying to make localized plans to continue learning and teaching. The schools that we work with are becoming very creative in ensuring that there is continued and remote learning at this point in time. And the government is trying to make mass media available by means of zero rating some websites with content, and then radio and TV responding.
All right, just give us a practical example of exactly what it is. What are these solutions that South Africa, for instance, is looking at, both for the rural areas and the urban areas, both for accessibility to those who may not have online education?
Yes, the access issue is probably the number one issue that's being discussed at the moment. Mobile data is still fairly expensive, or very expensive in South Africa. And in the rural areas, there's no fixed line deployment and infrastructure either. So what we're seeing is that there's quite a bit of standstill in the rural areas, and it's difficult. What schools are trying to do is work with communication platforms, even as low-key as a WhatsApp group, to just get some means of communication to parents and to learners, but that's not a strong one. In those areas, the government is making a plan for zero-rated websites with content on, and then radio broadcasts, TV broadcasts, a good schedule of that. So there's mass availability to the less fortunate as far as access goes. What's happening in the suburban areas, what we're finding is a wide diversity of plans being rolled out, where there's access of availability of data and availability of devices. Some schools are deploying Microsoft Teams, Google Classrooms, some other apps that are hosting classes, but the data is not free, and the subscription is also not free. So parents are making plans, schools are making plans, even dialing it down to just recording a voice over PowerPoint and making that lesson available on the school's website, or some sort of a OneDrive or Google Drive, so that parents can access that, or maybe even using a cell phone. I saw a picture of a teacher taping a cell phone to a camera tripod and recording herself writing against the wall of her house and doing a math solve. So yeah, there's a lot of creative plans coming about.
Right, so South Africa is exploring quite a number of innovative solutions to try and ensure that the education continues at this time, including helping prepare students for their final high school examinations. And walk us through this and how you feel this is working.
Yes, we are in the early days of it working. Some of the schools that I've had contact with, the final year students have fairly, in a broad spectrum, continued. But I'm not talking of a representative sample of the whole country. So final year students, I think, are not necessarily the most important, but definitely the most urgent to look at, because they've got to advance into university. So the focus from the Department of Education is to make sure that the final year, the grade 12s, can write their exams, even if it's at a later stage in the year. But the schools that have had the means have focused on that and delivered online lessons, worksheets, contact with students, whatever they could have done to ensure that learning and teaching for the grade 12s at least continues. There's a very short space of time left for them to cover their curriculum. Their final exams were supposed to start in October, prelim exams in August. So the curriculum coverage is less time for them to cover. They pretty much have covered a lot of it already, but it's the revision time that we're losing out now, and a short period of time for the remainder of the curriculum. But yes, they're shoulder against the wheel at this point in time in the final years.
So we're looking at the different options that South Africa has been exploring, and you've talked about in the rural areas, there is no one solution fit all for the country. In the rural areas, perhaps the broadcast works better than online. And in the urban areas, some private schools are going fully online. What do you see, though, as some of the challenges that should be overcome here? We are talking about how do you design a universal system that complements the African situation in terms of its flexibility, in terms of its accessibility, and making it cost effective, so that if we have another situation like COVID-19, then the continent or the various countries are well prepared.
I think the education system is under severe pressure to look at itself by means of policy. We have a one-size-fits-all approach. We've got a single grade approach. We got a very high focus on exams and assessment approach rather than on teaching skills. I think one of the big issues are we're managing attendance, but not contribution. So if you're at school, you get a good mark next to your name. Whether you're in class and learning or not is irrelevant, but you were there. So I think online learning teaches us that you could be very engaged, like I'm with you now on Skype. We're having a decent conversation, we're engaged. So the policy needs to change to understand how can we fit into this world and future-proof ourselves for if something like this happens. The second line of it is the educators, the digital maturity, not fluency, not even literacy, but the maturity of educators to fit into this world. One of the biggest issues we see is the slow adoption of the educators to live in this world. Parents and households have become more accustomed to it, but the education system, the broader system with a capital S, does not allow for that in a big way. Other accessibility issues, I think, include data. Data coverage. In the rural areas, it's easy for the high-powered infrastructure providers to go for the dense metropolitan areas because there's a lot of clients, but the people that have get more and the people that don't have get less. So we've got to get access, the costing and data coverage right. We've got to help educators map the work from the free resources, the available resources, to the learner's daily schedule. And then we've got to get access to devices.
If you look at what can be learned and the opportunities that can be gained, both for the technology companies, for the education sector, for the parents, and for the students as well, what lessons do you think the education sector is learning from COVID-19 shutdowns, and how can we build from this experience?
Yeah, I think what the education system is learning very quickly is that school is a process and not a place. I think what the school system or government could be learning in this place, in this opportunity, the crisis that turns into opportunities, is that it highlights the digital divide in a big way. And that's the sadness of it. But it also can mean that we can take this opportunity to use the digital bridge. A learner in the foothills of the Drakensberg can have access to the best maths teacher of MIT if there is data access and coverage there. So there's great opportunities in that, and we should be doing that. IT companies or education technology companies are seeing a great uptake in their products. So fine-tuning their products, I think, is a great opportunity at this point in time. Reducing prices because of mass and scale rollout makes it more accessible. And I think parents are getting a great appreciation for the teacher. The job that the teacher is doing at school, suddenly you realize that the teacher is having an immense impact in your child's life, not just by means of delivering the content, but by means of the relationship and the stability and the keeping busy, being in the child's domain, the child's world. A lot of parents, a lot of funnies on the internet and WhatsApp groups going around about parents suddenly understanding the big job that teachers are doing and the appreciation for teachers.
All right, Rian van der Berg joining us there via Skype from Johannesburg. Thank you very much for your insights on education and technology post-COVID-19. Well, we're going to take a short break now. When we come back, we'll be speaking to Nivi Sharma, the COO of BRIC Education, to get a better idea of how technological innovation can help provide solutions to providing education for all. To stay with us.
Life moves pretty fast. Ideas move at the speed of sound. Technology moves at the speed of light. If you don't filter out the noise, you might miss the details. We pay attention to the details because they matter, showing you a different perspective. See the difference.
Welcome back to Talk Africa. Quarantines and lockdowns have impacted families and the way children are learning around Africa. For some children who have internet access, learning from home has become the new normal. My colleague Robert Nagila spoke to one family in Kenya to find out how the experience has been so far for them.
With more than half the world's school children at home, as countries fight the pandemic COVID-19, students with internet connectivity at home have continued their education online via interfaces like the app Zoom, which allows interaction between teachers and students in virtual classrooms. I spoke to one family in Kenya who were able to carry on classes to see how they're adapting to this new form of learning.
Well, I've had to adjust to online schooling, which was cool at first, but then it got kind of irritating real fast.
For the older one, her high school really took it on. Nairobi Academy really took it on and caused online schooling without hardly any input from me. She just opened her laptop and she had her email and her Zoom page and everything was just run by them.
However, despite cell phone and internet penetration improving across the continent, a majority of Africans cannot afford the costs of data bundles, meaning access to online learning is difficult for low-income families. To bridge the gap, one educator in Kenya has found a unique solution. Using the phone app WhatsApp, he provides access to online learning for children from disadvantaged backgrounds.
As a teacher, even if you teach under 3 in classroom, online, as long as you are using the approved material, you are relevant. The parent has the role of monitorship because some of the children cannot actually type because the younger age. Parents will have to play a role. Some of them do not know how to record their voices back and give the feedback of what the teacher have asked.
Mommy? Yes.
For families with more than one child, it is also necessary to have more than one device for children to engage in online learning. For Africa's children to have universal access to online platforms, governments need to address cost and connectivity issues. This will not only provide them with access to different learning material, but also open up a world of endless possibilities. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Before the break, we looked at the challenges of COVID-19 on education across Africa. Let's now look at how technological innovation can help in providing solutions. Joining me now via Skype to unpack this is Nivi Sharma. She's the COO of BRIC Education. Nivi, thank you for joining us on Talk Africa today. I want to start off by looking at the situation in Africa because at the moment, school-based education has been disrupted massively by COVID-19. And we have estimates that about 297 million learners in Africa have been affected. In terms of accessibility on the continent, who's learning online and who's missing out? What is the situation in Africa looking like?
I think the situation in a lot of Africa is similar to everywhere around the world, which is parents are confused, teachers are confused, and students are also confused. So that is prevalent globally. And what we can say here is that we're a little bit disadvantaged in that the access we have to technology, the access we have to digital infrastructure is sometimes a step behind the West. So, you know, while some schools in the US and Europe or in China are continuing through online education, a lot of the public schools in Kenya are not able to maintain that.
So a lot of schools are not able to maintain that, but there is some sense of maybe private education is continuing online. In terms of percentages, though, what is it looking like? Like how many children across Kenya, for instance, or across Africa do you think are being locked out because of this lack of infrastructure?
So in Kenya, for example, we have over 27,000 public primary schools. And of those, I would say a small minority of them are doing any kind of online training. There is, the Kenyan government has tried to do some education via TV, through radio. But when we really think about, engaging educational models, about using technology to overcome these barriers, there is, a minuscule percentage that is actually taking advantage of these. So the majority are locked out.
What is the most challenging aspect in terms of trying to provide that online education? Because, of course, these are unprecedented times, and we don't know, for instance, how long COVID-19 will be around on the continent, in Kenya, for instance. What is the biggest challenge when accessing that technology?
Well, it's interesting. We've had the same challenge a few months ago when the government tried to implement a one laptop per child initiative. And the same challenges in implementing those in schools are showing themselves now. So before we think about doing an online Zoom class, or before we think of doing a class via Google Classrooms, or showing a child an animation of how the solar system works, we need to understand at the very basic level is an infrastructure problem. And over there, if we do not have power and connectivity in the hands of teachers and in the homes of parents, then we're not going to get anywhere. On top of the infrastructure, there's the basic problem of hardware. Do people have access to a smartphone, a tablet, a laptop at home? Very few parents do. And then on top of that is, do they have the digital literacy to be able to navigate the software and the platforms necessary in order to guide their children through that? And the very few parents that are privileged enough to have all of those things, do they have the time to guide their children through an online course with a teacher who is also struggling with the same, with the same platforms? Then there's a very small slice of that pie left with parents and students who are actually continuing to learn in the traditional model of education.
So it looks like there is a lot, there are a lot of missing links here, parent education, the educators' education, and the lack of accessibility for the students. Let's take a look at a poor African family, for instance, in the future, if we have to take part in online education. What is the cost of the basic technology that will be required to make this work?
Well, I think we're asking the wrong question in that we're defaulting back to our chalk and talk methodology. We're defaulting back to saying that there must be a teacher and there must be a curriculum and there must be content and there must be a learner. And what the world is seeing now is that, well, when we throw all of these things out the window, then our children are still able to be curious, they're still able to play, they're still able to explore the world around them, and we don't have to necessarily, hammer this square into a round hole because it doesn't fit there. So I think before we think about how do we make this technology work to do what traditionally used to work in schools, I think we're taking a further step back and saying, well, actually, traditional schools, there were some things that didn't work at all. And what would it look like if we were to throw everything out the window and start from scratch? And that's a very big question.
So what would it look like if we were to throw everything out the window and start from scratch?
Well, to begin with, like I said, we need to deal with power and connectivity. So we need to make sure that the basic infrastructure is there, that accessibility to the digital paradigm, whatever it looks like, is there. So power and connectivity are the foundational building blocks to anything that we're going to do in education. And then we need to take a step back and realize that localized education, that it's not going to be importing education or online classes that are working in Manchester for some kids, in China for other kids, in the USA for other kids, that we're going to have to spend more time, spend more money, spend more investment in investing in local educational solutions. And so, and that's where the exploration will begin. So we don't know what it will look like, we don't know how much it will cost, but we know that we must invest in the foundational building blocks to rebuild our educational system.
So let's look at those local educational solutions, because I know you have been involved in education technology in emerging markets. What do you find that, what are the fundamentals that you find that work in emerging market economies?
So we found that teacher training, when we were thinking about the traditional format of education, teacher training was something that works. A heavy emphasis on empowering teachers, on empowering educators. And we found that, again, localizing content, so making it culturally relevant, making it culturally significant to the learner is a really important way of teaching. So you can't teach literacy to a child in a language that they don't speak. You can't teach them to write in that language. You've got to teach them in a language that they speak. So localizing things like literacy and numeracy in local languages, and we've got over 42 in Kenya alone. Like those are challenges that we have to start overcoming now.
So I've also looked at part of what you've done, Niva, and I see that you're a co-founder of Elimu, the first company to digitize the Kenya primary school curriculum for revision and literacy. Talk us through this concept particularly, and what's been its impact on e-learning.
Well, so Elimu started as a very simple idea, saying that let's take a textbook, a revision textbook for 13, 14-year-olds. And what we did is we say, instead of reading through this black and white textbook, how about we add an animation here? How about we add a song to remind the students of the colors of the rainbow here? How about we add a game over here? And, just making it a little more engaging, making it a little bit more fun. And then what we did after that was teaching children how to read. So again, telling them stories, telling children stories that they enjoy listening to, that they can follow along with, telling them in a voice that sounds like the voice of their mother or their aunt or an uncle, or a familiar voice that they're able to relate to. And, illustrating those stories with beautiful illustrations that are grounded in places that look like where they live, in the villages that they live in the cities they live in, and just making everything a little more relatable and ensuring that every child feels that this book, that this lesson was made for them and was made for them to enjoy. So that's how that was our approach. There are many, many approaches towards education technology and content. But personally, I had to move on from the work of building educational content to fix this problem of infrastructure, of connectivity. And so again, we keep going to schools. We kept going to parents who said, oh, this looks wonderful, but I'm not online. I don't have a computer lab. I don't have access to a smartphone. How do I engage with educational content when I'm not even on the table for digital access at all?
So Nivi, that is an interesting question, because if you're now involved in matters of infrastructure and connectivity, take us through a system that would be designed for African situations. How would you design a universal system that speaks to the African situation in terms of issues like flexibility, accessibility, and questions of cost effectiveness?
I think we're really going to struggle finding a one-size-fits-all solution for this. But this pandemic will be a great breeding ground for solutions, for ideas from the ground, and saying that, well, this family over here tried this and that worked for them, and this village tried this and that worked for them. I don't think we're going to get a silver bullet that will answer this question for access and equitable education.
A very good discussion indeed there. And that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to all our guests, Rian van der Berg, the Education Technology Manager for the Federation of Governing Bodies of South African Schools, and in Nairobi, Nivi Sharma, the COO of BRIC Education, both joining us via Skype. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation online through our social media handles on Facebook and Twitter. You can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist. Do keep the conversation going and join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi, until next time, stay safe and goodbye.